Today I'm here to present the result of some of my recent research, making investigation and study on site of how much it concerns the ancient God, that those who in the text are defined in very detailed way, both as regards the habits and the way they behave. However, there are less details regarding their appearance. We often dwell on that might have been the appearance of these gods descended from the sky, of those beings who in all likelihood were actually gods, visitors from other worlds. It is not known whether of parallel dimension or of planets. Surely these gods were different from us, that we could define. Quite aliens or not humans beings. The gods have important features, certainly, first of all, described in all the texts, that were immortals. This does not mean they did not die. They could be wounded in combat. They're notorious endowed with great strength. They were a little taller than us, with a height that could vary, be 6 feet tall, and something they could also be 10 feet, let's say. There are discrepancies from this point of view, but certainly some ancient visitors were very high and very strong. They were described with enormous force. For example, in the Bible, Samson, since he was still a young boy, he was strong. This character of the Bible, however, was born with characteristic, as we will see, a lot of details, so that before his birth, an angel came to announce parents that they would have a child. They should never have cut his hair. This odd custom that remember custom of other people who have this tradition that you never have to cut your hairs because they are sacred, so they tell him never have to cut this child's hair. And then the angels who told this ask to sacrifice a sheep. This married couple sets up an altar and sets fire, and when the sheep flesh was burning there, the angel enters the flame of the altar and goes up to heaven. And with the flame from the altar, a kind of teleport of some kind thought, it connects the flame of the altar, and thus make you think that somehow the gods could feed of the energy that was released from this sacrifice in some way that we still have to understand. There were definitely more alien races at the time. We had said more races, and we say this because in the older texts we have available, like the epic of Gilgamesh, it said in Kind, the friend of Gilgamesh. Indeed, according to one more recent interpretation, even the lover of Gilgamesh, a love story with self-gay nuance, so much that when he dies, because Enkidu is cursed by the gods and falls ill, then Gilgamesh cried desperately, saying, "The man I love." It's certainly interesting that point of view. However, in those texts, Enkidu in particular way, first of his name, created by God Enki, because he was created, maybe in a laboratory. Enkidu, contrary to other legendary beings, had in part animal feature. He is often represented with the legs of a satyr, with a long beard, and with elongated ears and with some horns, so we could define him at all effect a kind of satyr, like the god Pan. These satyr-like beings were very widespread at the time, and there are many inscriptions describing other creatures similar to Enkidu. In example, there are some representation of the Enlil, the god of sky, who is represented with these ears, a bit like a satyr, and legs similar to goat. This is important because there were two kind of alien gods of the time. One very similar to the Nordic gods with light blonde hair, almost white, and white blue eyes. But beware, we are not talking about the classical Hollywood blonde Hattie that we can see sometimes in the movies of the Avenger. Actually, they were a bit strange. Their hair is said in the Gospels. Their hair, when Magdalene finds the empty tomb, she sees this angel, or at last she defines him an angel, even if he don't have wings. He was a man, but was surrounded by this light and with this white hair. But she defined them as white as those of a sheep. Why she didn't say it white as an old man one? Evidently he had something strange in this hair. They had a glow, and the glow surround this the angel's head. So there's this creature, Nordic, and then there was instead with the creature with black hair, described in some Sumerian text. They said they were minor deities who often did the hard work, manual work, and that was so tough that they rebel against the Anunnaki, against the gods of the sky. They say, we want to do any more of this job. We are tired of doing these terrible jobs. We want someone else work in the mine or build temples. And then the white-haired Sumerian gods create the human beings. This is a short summary to make it clear that they were two types of god. One more similar to goats, and to make an example to the satyrs, who certainly did these hard jobs, and the others weren't quite like us, even though they were definitely with Nordic features. However, what has always come up in the legend is something, for example, this Sumerian helmet. In fact, the Sumerian gods were or are always depicted with this helmet, elongated, that resemble a bishop hat, the mitre. Throughout the ancient world, the kings of Christ had always these big and long complicated hats, because these things we think is probably an integral part of this pitch I want to say today, is a true aspect of the Elohim or Anunnaki, more or less two terms that define the same race, that the ancient visitor, the first pitch we can make is inherent the skull of these creatures. Surely these beings had an elongated skull cap. We can say this with confidence because throughout the ancient world we have, from Egypt to India up to South America, there was a habit of elongating the skull of a child. Since childhood, to some people, especially in the wealthiest social classes, they made a procedure to tighten with boards and, let's say, fabrics the head. They made the skull, since childhood of these people is one terrifying practice. I don't imagine how painful it was being for them. Stretch it and have skull then deformed, stretch it up, and there are many ancient skulls with this characteristic, and obviously they are clearly human skull. However, what is interesting here is that this habit to make this painful transformation of the body was due to the fact that they wanted to look like the gods of the sky. This is an interesting thing too, because some of these allocated skulls were also found in Nazca, Peru. Nazca was precisely the name of this tribe of ancient Indians that they have built the famous Nazca line of Peru, so they had made this design visible only from above, because so they could see from this god that arrived from above. They have stretched their heads in various parts of the world. So this makes us understand why often even the Sumerian gods are depicted with these very tall and long helmets. They probably had to somehow protect these cap-eye heads, this more developed skull, perhaps also characterized by the different development of a brain that perhaps allowed them to have access to some psychic powers that we cannot even imagine. This Sumerian helmet, besides being therefore elongated and probably also served to protect or hide their aspect in case they want to walk around amongst humans, let's say elongated skull also had another feature. Is this helmet that the gods had horns on it. The horns are folded forward, could be 7 or 8, sometimes 6. But the strange thing is that 3 horns are almost always shown on one side and 4 from the other side. This is very strange because, of course, if you want to represent the animal kingdom, usually only make 2 horns. Then the fact of making them odd and could have several different reasons. Could have a sacred or symbolic meaning. Of course, they think that, however, that was strange is that in all ancient civilization it is said that the gods they had horns. They were recognizable even in a Celtic world, in a Nordic world. It is always said that the gods of the sky were famous to this feature of these special horns they got. That, however, in the paintings, every step of the events are not always seems in this case. There is the second helmet, but the horns are folded forward like this, almost if there were a pattern, maybe an ornamental helmet. We then looking for the true nature of these weird horns. They had a profound and important meaning, so much that in some Hebrew Midrash, then speaking of Cain and Abel, it is said that God put a mark on the head of Cain, who had killed Abel, so no one could kill him. But this symbol on this head would have been, according to some Jewish commentary, precisely from some Jewish Midrash, would have been a horn in the middle of the forehead. Therefore, there's something really important about even Moses itself descended from Sinai mountain, and they said when it comes down, after passing a very long time on the Sinai with Yahweh, Moses have 2 horns on the forehead. Although the term used, and here we approach our discovery today, the term used could, I consider fundamental, that I want to share with you, is that the Hebrew terms mean horns and light at the same time, confusing a bit everyone. Confuse even the sculptor that, not knowing whether to represent the rise of light around the face of Moses of horns, they decide to make horns in the form of rise of light. It is said that when Moses descended, his aspect was so weird that he had to put a veil on his face, so as not to show it, because whoever saw him, he could no longer do anything. So I was desperately trying to understand how these horns of the ancient were made. So I started to look for another side of the story at some point. The other side of the story is inherent in the famous radiance of glow of the gods. Mesopotamian legends speak of the Melili of Melim, but it's not clear this term, which indicates something that the gods wore before to fight, like a protection. The gods wore a Melili in these fights. So imagine as if we were dressed, but in some cases was even thought to be perhaps something that was put on the body like a cream, who knows. Anyway, it was something to wear, but this Melili had a glow, a brilliant radiance. However, this Melili also had 2 very important characteristics. First, provide to the gods with a splendor that terrify everyone. And this is very important. Making goosebumps and in some cases paralyzed people. It had a chemical or electrochemical effect of the beholder. Who watched the light felt goosebumps and felt almost paralyzed, an ecstatic state, and also terrified by this light that emanates. This defense was practically impenetrable, invisible shield no one could overcome. That was created. This shield was formed right around the Sumerian gods, or the Indian ones, so much so that when Gilgamesh and his companion tried to destroy the monster Hubamba that wore 7 of those invisible shields, he have to tell him, look, you could meeting with very beautiful woman. So then Hubamba removes this protection. Suddenly he was defenseless and unguarded, so that Gilgamesh punched him in the face and knocked him down. So it is to be understood that in this myth, the fact of this radiant shield, this luminous protection of the gods, Hubamba, were in this case 7 invisible shields, 7 exactly like the horns of the heads of these gods. These that now are taken away. Now we are talking about the Anunnaki. The first thing here we must think somehow is maybe a sort of electromagnetic accessory, a technological device that creates this shield. That will be able to take off, and when they wear it, a kind of field is activated. A protective energy with a brightness, we will think, I certainly was there, to the gods also had a device that could enhance a certainly defense. But this defense was not only technological, it was something natural. Something already in their biology, something they had in nature that they could enhance with technology, perhaps with a device that could activate or deactivate an exaltation of this power. They had by default so naturally. Why I say that? I say it's natural for several reasons, and now we come to today discover, which I think is sensational, and I am really happy to have done these steps because I'm about to share with you something that I think is truly important. It is always represented the importance of hair. When Samson is born, to this particular hair that is collected in 7 braids. The 7 braids were strange because thanks to it no one came close to him. He could easily free himself, was invincible. It must be explained that this defense, that glow, somehow sometimes was used not only by the gods, sometimes kings had it too. Kings who, however, were partly with God's blood, partly with alien DNA, and sometimes also demons or strange creatures wear this protection too, evidently creature with this blood, with this DNA. Why I say this gift was a natural one? Well, when Noah was born, according to some rabbinical writings, when Noah was born, in the middle of the night, he opens the eyes and emanates this brilliant glow, a light which comes out from him. Obviously, the newborn have no technology, was an infant, don't wear anything technological. He lived in a normal house, and his light illuminated everything. The scriptures say it's as if someone have turned on a lamp. So there is a strong light without technology. We have the tradition of the saints having this halo around their heads. Pay attention, because the depiction of the sun god, such as those of the statue that was in the port of Rhodes in Greece, the Colossus of Rhodes. The statue represents the sun god and have 7 or more rays, just like the Statue of Liberty in New York. The statue, in some way, was said to make at the Masonic level. The Liberty statue is a gift made by the French government to USA. Also, the Statue of Liberty has the 7 rays around the head, a brilliance, but also something more. Pay attention. We start approaching a very strange, very interesting speech here. The true secret of Elohim or Anunnaki was the fact that they can create an energy field that make them unreachable. There are testimonies of this field made of protective energy in all the ancient legendary myths and ancient mythological texts. And not even the Celtic ones, of course, also the Greek ones, they call IGES. Mostly Athena used it, but was the IGES, they say, that protect the gods, so sometimes painted as a shield, sometimes as a steel breastplate, to which, however, there was the head of a Medusa on it, with snakes as hairs, because it was said, sometimes they say that this IGES is made with a goat skin. However, the term goats is very similar to another term in ancient Greek that means storm. In fact, sometimes it's said that this aegis is like a storm cloud that surrounds the god, some kind of static electricity, as kind of energy field that surrounds a person. But when they represented in the Greek myth, it had this same paralyzing effect on people and kept them at distance. They aren't allowed to get closer because this tower is represented with the head of Medusa. And what's behind the legend of Medusa? Pay attention, because I believe that the legend of Medusa and the story of Samson and the famous substance that could make the god unapproachable, which gave them this brilliance, are related to some very ancient religion, such as, for example, the veneration of God Shiva in India. About Shiva, we must say, is an ancient Indian god. The first texts about him are about 5,000, 6,000 years ago, but the verbal tradition of the worship of Shiva is something that goes back in time to 10,000 years ago. So we are talking about a very ancient deity. The follower of Shiva, still today, must gather all the hairs into a kind of big braids, a sort of dreadlocks, like the Jamaicans, and then wrap and put it over their heads. This is to resemble God Shiva. Actually, in the older depiction, Shiva is represented with long, thick braids that can also be 7 or more, collected and then put on the top of the head. Pay attention, because the helmet on the Sumerian gods perhaps have no horns on it. But maybe those things aren't really horns. Perhaps the helmet was nothing else that a way to style the 7 brides. They had just like the 7 brides of Samson that gave him immeasurable strength. And let's remember that Samson was also very high, but the Bible says that when he was young, Samson takes a lion, as if it was a stuffed animal, and opened it in two with his bare hands. The statues of Gilgamesh, we see this gigantic man takes a lion, like was a little cat for him. However, the legend says that no matter how big Samson was, his strength depended upon those 7 braids that could somehow represent the 7 rays of the sun of the ancient god. And so this kind of brightness that come out from them, this white hair, just like the angels seen by Magdalene, have to be very weird. Therefore, the only thing that comes to mind is a testimony I heard from an Ukrainian girl years ago. She had seen something get out of a river at night when she was doing barbecue with his husband in Ukraine. 3 weird creatures rise from the river. They were pale and glowing, human-like, with long hair, but she didn't understand if they have hair of tentacles. This could seem a really science fiction scenario here, but I swear, follow me, because this theory could answer too many questions. So try to imagine creatures like those seen in the Star Wars movie or other fiction movies with tentacles at the place, in the place of hair, or like the inhabitants of the world of Avatar in the movie. They had a bit of tentacles in the final part of the hair, a kind of long protrusion, maybe in the number of 7 or 8 or more. They have a life of their own, just as we can move our fingers. They're just not normal hair, but just a kind of extension of the head, already elongated because they hadn't this long skull and with those tentacles, which evidently come because of their particular evolution, maybe from the sea, in their planet, or in their dimension. So they had some peculiar characteristic. Let's remember that they weren't really hair, even though they seemed. Maybe they grow with brain cells inside. Probably they were attached directly to the brain. Therefore, they are particular qualities, among which also emanating a ray of light, very strong light that paralyzed, a light that also gave dismay. Because it was an odd light, obviously very beautiful light that almost started admiration, but at the same time it is said that this glow of gods also gave you goosebump and terror and made you almost paralyzed. A description very similar to that of the Greeks regarding Medusa. That may be a natural gift they had, like some animals, however, could be enhanced thanks to a sort of crown or helmets that took this, let's say, electromagnetic energy emitted by these tentacles or antenna from these 7 braids they have, and could amplify it, making become a real impenetrable shield or field force, and you will be practically invincible in battle. So if someone cut the tentacles' hair with scissors, it's also imagine the pain of these sort of tentacles cut down. They could then be used to amplify the powers. Clearly, with the cutted hairs, they no longer have that light, not even the strength as Samson. So, in some way, it was an offshot that gave they enormous strength, but became a weak point. That's why they protect themselves with these helmets, because they did letting these tentacles out of the helmet to perform better and protect their hairs. So the gods take the 7 braids for the neck and from behind put in front, leaning on the helmet, so they could possibly walk better. This would explain why in some ancient tradition it is said that it is necessary to let hair grow. They said if we have longest hair, our psychic powers increase. So these brilliant horns that bind were not horns, were offshot, just like those of a Medusa that moved tentacles, could look like snakes. That was a subtle point in the Bible. Moses had to put a veil, because these light horns may be similar to some coelenterates, some animals and fishes of the death, creatures of the abyss that perhaps living in the abyss have developed this chemical substance called Luciferian, which is a kind of substance that glow in the dark. So how some deep sea animal have some sort of luminous tentacles with luminous zone that they could light. This is a working hypothesis, not a statement to have all the truth, the final certainly truth in hand, but in my opinion is a good working hypothesis, because it would unite the mystery of these horns, not horns, that continue to emerge regards the ancient gods, and as their fundamental trait to be recognized. In fact, they had the ability to emanate this light, the spread of these 7 rays of light which they have always portrayed, or the 7 locks of hair, the 7 braids of Samson, the 7 horns of the gods, on the helmet of the Sumerian gods. In short, everything would return, everything would make sense. And not only would they distinguish this kind of hair when they are loose, maybe loose back, they make look like normal hair, but it makes clear why they were concerned about that, even shown them, because it was a weakness. Obviously, it was something he gave a lot of light. They could blind people, they could give out very intensive electromagnetic fields that slowed down enemy, blocked or frightened enemy, but obviously it was also a weak point, because as in the Samson story, they could be cut. These tentacles, these locks, may make them weak and helpless if someone discovers this weak point. As in the story of Medusa, maybe the head could be cut off, and with some tricks, now I just know which one, they could try to keep this ability active in the severed heads. Might be the light remain, and to be able to give off a light or even some sort of paralyzing effect, as the story of Perseus tells us, that with the head of Medusa manages to paralyze his enemy. Surely there is so much to study there to separate the purely symbolic parts, the mythological parts, from the real ones. However, in my opinion, it could be a turning point essential to understand not only the appearance of these ancient gods of the sky, but also their great strength and their great Achilles heels, their weakness. Something that will then take it up in the iconography, and it's represented a precise way. Therefore, on the one hand, the ideas of the kings that they call Deus, God, derived from the Indian word Deva, that means the shining ones. Precisely, the gods were recognized exactly for their ability to shine. Therefore, the gods were the shining ones who emanated light. However, all the animals that on the earth have developed this ability to produce light are those animals of depth, always animals of the fishes who live in deep caves on deep waters. There are many stories on paper about a subterranean realm, an underground realm, to which for millennia, if not millions of years, they lived a parallel civilization that will learn to live underground, like Shambhala or Alchemists say that these gods eventually took refuge underground. Could be just a myth, just an idea. However, interesting to think maybe some of these beings came from a shadow planet, from a dark world, and they have developed with an elongated brain case, ending with this ganglia, these sprawling braids. They could be maybe emanate light, and together with light also electromagnetic frequency. It's a working hypothesis, but I would also ask my colleagues to think about it, to see how much this idea might work and link to a mythological corpus of legends and ancient traditions of various parts of the world, eventually find confirmation or denial, and in sort try to understand just what the aspect they have. That you think there were the idea of light beings, therefore they were the Elohim who had this luminosity and, let's say, a more Nordic aspect, and then we have the other gods who have, let's say, a more animal aspect, a more god aspect, like the god Pan, the satyr with black hair and the beard. At this point we can surely think that these two clans of gods ended up representing our angels and demons or antiquity, and in the fact, however, that we are trying to understand the true aspect of this god. But I think that perhaps this idea we can make a decisive step forward in understanding how our ancient gods who visit us were made.